What's up, everybody? Greetings and salutations. It's E. Spencer Kyte, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, on Thursday, November 17th, which means it's time for 10 things I like about UFC Vegas 65. Now, I know what you're thinking. Good Lord, man, how did you find 10 things that you like about this card? It wasn't easy. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't easy. All of these are legitimate. Listen, all of these are legitimate. They are truly things I like about this fight card. But this is a different set of things that I like that maybe we had last week for UFC 281. And then we will have for 2 weeks from now when the UFC returns to the Amway Center in Orlando, Florida, with a loaded fight night event headlined by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Kevin Holland. This is one of those cards that is designed for me, for dudes like me that are looking at things 2, 3, 4 fights down the road, holding that long-term vision, holding that long-term sort of think about these things for a lot of these athletes in terms of what this fight could maybe mean 3 or 4 fights down the road. It's not the same as, oh my God, this fight is amazing, and here are the ramifications it's going to have that we had last week. And God, was last week great. This week is the quintessential hangover card. I know I said it yesterday. I'm saying it again. It is the quintessential hangover card. Last week was amazing. We're still talking about it now. So here's this collection of fights. And there's some interesting fights on this card, as we talked about on the preview show, as I talked about yesterday on One Question, but it's just not the same. And I want to stress that to everybody so that people aren't sitting down on Saturday morning and being like, man, what the hell is this? It is a different set of fights than we usually, it's a different set of fights than we usually have. I mentioned in there Saturday morning, this fight card starts out here for me on the West Coast of Canada at 10 a.m. And for fellow Canadians, it airs exclusively on UFC Fight Pass. I don't know what that means for anyone else that gets it on ESPN Plus or overseas. Please check your local listings. I recommend always checking the UFC affiliate in your region on the morning of the fight or the day of the fights. That's what I do every Saturday when I get up. I pull up UFC Canada and it tells me what time everything starts so I can plan out the rest of my day and let my wife know when I am going to be sequestering myself in the den to watch 6 hours of fighting. This week, that starts at 10 a.m., which means second cup of coffee with the face punching. I am truly looking forward to it, as much as it may not sound it in this introduction. I am truly looking forward to this card. So let's get into it. Item number 1, underdog Derek Lewis. Now, in speaking with Derek Lewis on Saturday and asking him about being the underdog, he said, look, I've been the underdog my whole career, my whole life. This is the story of who I am. I've very seldom been the favorite in terms of betting and in terms of being picked to win these fights. And I kind of get what he's saying, but no, that's not true. Derek Lewis hasn't been the underdog the whole way along. He's been a favorite and a heavy favorite at times throughout his career. But it's interesting to me that he's the underdog here. He is the higher ranked fighter. He is the more established and more proven of the two, he and Sergey Spivak. He has that concussive power, that one hitter, maybe the most dynamic fight-changing power of anyone on the UFC roster right now. And I say that with all due respect to the heavyweight champion, Francis Ngannou. Derek Lewis just needs one and just needs to touch it. Ask Alex Volkanovski. Ask Curtis Blades from 2 wins ago for Derek Lewis. But it's interesting that he's in this position as an underdog, because it sounded in speaking to him like it's lit a bit of a fire. He's made some changes for his camp. Coming into this one, Joe Murphy is at the helm. That is Lauren Murphy's husband. He is a jiu-jitsu black belt and a really good coach. But Joe's at the helm. Crew Bob Perez is out. They are still close. They are still friends, but Bob just isn't running things and working with Derek in that regards anymore. Derek said he needed to change things up. These last couple losses left a sour taste in his mouth, especially the loss to Sergey Pavlovich, which came in 55 seconds in Dallas earlier this year. And I'm just really interested to see whether, sort of feeling for the first time, it feels for the first time like Derek Lewis is a little bit counted out. Like people are starting to do the like, well, it's been a good run. And as he put it, he sees everybody looking at him sideways, like giving him that one-eyed, like, what's up with that guy over there? What's he got left in the tank? And as I said on the preview show, I flat out admitted to him on the phone as we spoke, listen, man, I'm asking those same questions. What's it like to have everybody asking these questions? And he said, I'm good with it. It's got me fired up. It's got me ready to go. And I want to see if that translates, because listen, we're being honest here, and I'm being honest here. We've heard this from Derek Lewis many times before. I'm taking it serious now and really in on my training and really excited about what I've been doing. And you're going to see some different stuff, and, you know, always going to swing and bang. But if I got to wrestle, I'm down. Let's see it. And I'm really, really interested to see if we see something different, to see if we see a different kind of hunger, a different kind of fire, a different kind of approach in terms of the volume he throws or the aggressiveness that we see out of the gate. Because these last couple fights, even going back to the Ciryl Gane fight, they just haven't been, I mean, they've been typical Derek Lewis fights, but they just haven't been Derek Lewis fights. Like, it hasn't felt like he's been in there the same way he was in some of these other matchups, the same way he was in that fight with Curtis Blades, the same way he was in that win over Chris Daukaus to close out last year. It's like these last couple fights, he's just sort of been psyched out a little bit and just kind of been checked out a little bit. And so he's said all the right things. He's got the betting world believing that he's going to get beat. He's got a lot of pundits and a lot of analysts believing that this is Sergey Spivak's moment, and Derek Lewis is in decline and on the way out. No longer going to be that stalwart in the middle of the division that you have to beat if you want to be a contender. And I just want to see, before I decide that, yep, those folks are right, whether it can serve as a motivating factor for him on Saturday to have a really great performance and remind everybody that I'm still that dude you got to get through in order to get to the top of the division. Item number 2, the ascending Sergey Spivak. So this one is a little personal for me because, hi, Sean Sheehan. Hi, boss. Hey, Skipper. Look who's moving up the heavyweight ladder. A few fights back, Sean and I believe it was ahead of the Augusto Sakai fight. So one fight back for Spivak. Sean and I were doing the preview show with Ian and Harry, and we got into a pretty heated discussion about, like, this fight matters versus Sean taking the position of this fight doesn't matter at all. These guys are number, I think it would have been something like 9-13 in the division, and they're going to be 9-13 after this. I don't see either of them doing anything. And me being the eternal optimist and the guy that wants to give everybody an opportunity said, listen, Spivak's 27. He's moved to Vegas. He's training at Extreme Couture. I want to give him, he's coming off a good win over Greg Hardy. Fine, it's Greg Hardy, but he's won 4 of his last 5. The only loss is Tom Aspinall, which I'm not going to fault anybody for. I want to see if he can put something together here. I want to give him, of all the people in the heavyweight division where Sean and I would have those conversations, and he would say, like, this is 7 versus 8 or 9 versus 10, and it doesn't change anything. Like when Alexander Volkov fought Jairzinho Rosenstrike or earlier this year, right? Perfect example. Doesn't really change anything. I thought that fight against Augusto Sakai was one that could change things, change perceptions and ideas a little bit about Sergey Spivak. And he went out and he won in impressive fashion, continues to play to his strengths, continues to just understand I'm a better grappler than a lot of these guys, and it takes away a bunch of their power and a bunch of their energy if I can just repeatedly put them on the canvas. We've seen Derek Lewis get taken down a bunch of times in the past. I don't know that he can hold him there or finish him there the way that he has these last couple guys that he's beaten, but I'm intrigued. It's been a while since there's been a fighter like this. And look, there have been some ascendant heavyweights over the last couple of years, right? Tom Aspinall has worked his way forward. Jairzinho Rosenstrike at one point was on a nice little run. Chris Dawkins was on a nice little run at one point. But we haven't seen a guy like Spivak that's in his 20s, is primarily a grappler. Like Tom Aspinall has grappling, and we've seen it, but he's also a dude that's got hands and is a real top shelf athlete. Spivak's just a grinder, man, and he's figuring out ways to win, and that's intriguing to me because it's a pain in the ass to deal with for great big human beings. Like he manhandled Greg Hardy, giving up 40 to 50 pounds to him, and did the same, maybe not 40 to 50 pounds against Augusto Sakai, but a good 25 or 30. And if he can do that on Saturday night against Derek Lewis, as much as beating Lewis doesn't necessarily hold the same weight and carry the same value as it did maybe at the start of the year, right? When Tai Tuivasa got his win over Derek Lewis to move himself forward in the division. It's still a good win. It's still an important victory. It's still a great feather in the cap of Sergey Spivak if he can go out and get it. And so having said at the start of the year and prior to his last fight that I'm interested and I want to see where it goes and I want to see where that development leads, I'm still interested. I still want to see where all of this development leads. Item 3, an important test for Kennedy and Zechiku. So most weeks we get to a Fortis MMA representative because they have a bunch of fighters in the UFC. And most weeks I acknowledge not necessarily a bias, but an interest in these athletes. I've spoken to most of them a number of times, including Kennedy, who I spoke to this week. I'm interested in seeing their growth and development because I think Fortis has done a very good job, and Saif Saud and the team there have done a very good job of developing fighters, of taking them from very early stages of their career in most cases and getting them to the point where they're the best version of themselves. That doesn't necessarily always mean championship contenders, but the best version of themselves and fighting to the best of their abilities, to the best of who they can be. We saw that last week with Ryan Spann, who continues to put things together and look good. We've seen it with Jeff Neal earlier this year. We've seen it with Sam Hughes going out and looking good in her first 2 fights since moving to Fortis. We've seen it a number of times. And Kennedy is the next fighter to step into the cage from this group. His teammate Fernan Garcia fights earlier in the night, but Kennedy's the next one that I think has some upside to him that we still haven't seen. And I'm really interested to see if his win over Carl Roberson earlier this year is the turning point that I felt it might have been. Now, I don't want to get too ahead of myself in terms of putting great weight and value on beating Carl Roberson. It's just a good win. It's not a great win. It's just a good win. I felt there were some building blocks there that could be positives going forward for Kennedy. But again, it's not like he beat a top 15 fighter and all of a sudden we need to start talking about rankings and things of that nature. Saturday, he's going to face a guy in Iwan Cutelaba who is going to come across the cage when he's being introduced and get right in his face. And if Kennedy isn't locked in, and if Kennedy isn't ready for the chaos that will ensue from the jump, this can go sideways. And I think that's going to be one of the very telling things about this fight right out of the chute. If this dude is figured out and figured out how to get locked in and how to come into these fights fully focused, fully aware, fully ready to execute, then all of Cutelaba's antics and, as Harry and Ian would put it, mad bastardry won't matter because it doesn't factor into the plan. It doesn't factor into what I'm going to do to you, which I'm fully capable of doing and believe I can come out and do. And so I just want to see if this 30-year-old that's always sort of been a little intriguing and has all of the he has all the measurables, right? I think that's what it is. It feels a little bit like one of those NBA guys, one of those wings that, has he's 6'6", but he's got a 7-foot wingspan and he should be a 3-and-D guy and he moves. That's Kennedy. He really feels a little bit like the little brother version of Ryan Spann, right? They're both 6'5". Kennedy's got 2 extra inches of reach, 83-inch reach. Hits well, good power, good chin. We've seen the durability. Like, the pieces are there, and I just want to see if this dude can put it together and keep taking some steps forward here on Saturday. Item 4, another look at Andre Fiallo. I know yesterday I did my tongue-in-cheek jerk-ass thing that I tend to do sometimes when people feel a way that I don't feel, and it backfires and I end up being right. I know it's a real douchey thing, and I'm trying to get better at it, but we all have those moments, and that is one of my weaker moments. Because look, everybody got real excited about Andre Fiallo after he beat Miguel Baeza and he knocked out Cameron Van Camp. Those aren't the wins to get real excited about. My guys here, Sean and Ian, both, I think he can be a real factor in this division, going to be a top 10 guy. And he said, pump the brakes. Let's see him against one of those real guys. The one that he fought beat him. So grain of salt, short notice, fine. Michel Pereira fight. But then he loses to Jake Matthews and he takes this time off since he stops trying to fight every single month, which I think is a very important, very good step for him. And like, I'm genuinely interested to see him back on Saturday against Muslim Salikov, because as much as I didn't put a huge amount of weight or value into beating Miguel Baeza and beating Cameron Van Camp, they're beating Baeza is still a good win, and handling Van Camp and dispatching him the way he did is still important. And so let's see what that loss and this reset does for a guy that's still short of 30, that clearly has some power, that clearly has some good technical striking, and is facing a guy in Salikov that has established his position in the division, being in that lower third of the top 15, or maybe now just outside of it, as he's 38 and coming in off a loss. But it's a loss to Li Jingliang, so it's not like he's getting beaten by scrubs. There were 6 straight wins before that. So like, this is a chance. This to me is the important fight for Andre Fiallo, right? The Jake Matthews fight felt like a bit of a step too far, coming off the win over Cameron Van Camp and hustling right back out there and trying to just keep the momentum going. And Jake Matthews was like, cool, here, have this. But if he can go out and beat Muslim Salikov, it sort of, to me, resets things going into next year. He comes in off a good win. He's 28 with a good team at Kill Cliff, 3 wins in the UFC, good power. Let's see where we get to. And I like fights like that. Stuff like that's intriguing to me. So let's see. Item 5, Jack Della Maddalena returns. Della is one of the few guys off last season of Contender Series that I was certain was going to have an impact this year. If you go back and read my Fighters to Watch series on the Substack, it is still up. You can still go and read the old Keyboard Kimura articles on the Substack. I said in the lead up to it that I wasn't going to, in sort of the first post of that series at the start of the year, that I wasn't going to include the Contender Series winners, because while there were some fighters that I was confident in, and I think I name checked Della and Michael Morales, there were a bunch of others that I was like, well, I'm just not sure. That's proven to be smart in terms of the overall, and I haven't done the numbers. I will run the numbers here at some point, just so that I have a sense of what last year's class has done. But it doesn't feel, just off memory, that it's been that great. But Della has been great. Got a win over Pete Rodriguez in his debut. You can push that one aside a little bit. Rodriguez was super overmatched. 4 fights in his career prior to that. Took it on short notice, but the win over Ramazan Emeev is a real win. Even if you don't necessarily know how good Ramazan Emeev is, take my word for it, it is a good win. He's not a guy that you get out of there in the first round if you're just some dude. And so for a 26-year-old switch hitting Australian who just, as Harry put it on the preview show, he just likes a fight and he just knows how to do the fighting. And like he and I joke about that stuff all the time, but like there's an element of that is real, right? Like there's an element to it of when shit starts going sideways and things start getting tougher, you can bite down on your gum shield and just be like, cool, I'm going to hit you in ways that change up this fight and swing it back in my direction. And Della Maddalena can do that. We saw him do it in the Ramazan Emeev fight. He got stuck in a bad Darce choke in a bad position because he made poor choices, worked his way free and was like, cool, I don't want to deal with that anymore. So here, have this liver shot. Those things are important. And as he continues to improve, as he continues to garner more experience, I think there's going to be more people that are really, really curious about how far he can go and seeing him in there with some bigger names. He fights Danny Roberts on the weekend. I think it is a potentially tailor-made showcase fight. This is one of those, it's a potential trap fight. All right, we're going to just call it what it is. It's a potential trap fight. Because if Jack Della Maddalena goes out there and thinks Danny Roberts is just some scrub that I'm going to gun through without much effort, Roberts can catch him. He's long, he's quick. When he looks good, he looks great. It's just that when he looks bad, he looks terrible. He's a guy that there's no in between, right? You would like him to just be, you would rather him be consistently good than inconsistently either great or awful. There's no, like, you would want him to be a C student, but he's that guy that gets an A sometimes and fails miserably the other times. And if Della goes in there expecting to get the guy that fails miserably, he can get caught. He can find trouble. He can walk into something that becomes a lot more competitive than maybe it should be. But if he goes in there the way he fought Pete Rodriguez or the way he eventually tuned into fighting Ramazan Emeev, this can be a showcase opportunity where he comes out of it with 3 straight wins to start his UFC career, probably asks for a spot on the Perth card in February, which he would probably get. There's enough time to turn that around, and becomes one of those guys that we are really paying attention to at welterweight going into next year. Item 6, Charles Johnson's sophomore appearance. Look, it's hard to hold that debut loss against him, right? Like a loss is a loss, and sure, you want to see guys win. But to come in your debut, go over to London and fight Muhammad Mokaev on his home turf, undefeated super prospect. I mean, what do you want me to do? How mad do you want me to be about it? Like, how disappointed in that result or that performance do you want me to be? Mokaev's on the short list of the top prospects in the sport. It was a home game, and it was Charles Johnson's debut. Like, a whole bunch of things stacked up against him, and it didn't go his way. Not surprised at all. Now, the important thing is this weekend. Faces Zhalgas Zhumagulov. It is in Las Vegas, so we're not talking about overseas travel. He's had the experience of making the walk for the first time in the UFC, and it was at the O2 with a whole bunch of raucous British fans cheering on one of their own. So he's got all of that out of the way. The jitters should be done. And so now let's see what you got, man. You were the LFA champ. You got a good win to retain your title earlier this year against Carlos Mota, but that guy came out in his UFC debut a couple weeks ago and didn't look great. Looked okay at times, but didn't look great against Cody Durden. And so unfortunately, because of the way these things work, your stock dropped as a result. Right? This is what happens. A guy you beat wins, and suddenly it ages well, and you start taking on a little bit more shine. But a guy you beat loses, and loses more convincingly than he lost to you. It suddenly starts to be like, oh, well, he went that far with that guy. Oh, all right. So he's a little bit under the microscope here and not quite backed into a corner, but like, you don't want to start your UFC career 0-2. You don't want to come out of the gate and struggle, especially not against the guy in Jumagulov that's 1-4 in the UFC. And even if like me, you think he is better than that record indicates, you still don't want to be the guy that joins Jerome Rivera in losing to Zhalgiz Jumagulov, because Jerome Rivera was just like 4 and done in the UFC. And I don't know that he ever gets back, even though he's still relatively young and all of these different things. And so there's some pressure on Charles Johnson here. I think he has the ability and the talent and the skills and all of those things to win this fight and be a good fixture in the division outside of the top 15, maybe sneak into the bottom third at some point, but we need to see it. We need to see a better performance. We need to see the things that carried him to a great deal of success under the LFA umbrella. And we need to see it starting this weekend. Item 7, Jennifer Maia's potential Dan Hooker moment. I talked about this yesterday. It was my question for this fight with Marina Moroz. Is this her chance to do it? It's just so intriguing to me. That's why I'm essentially doubling up on it. Jennifer Maia, like it's only 2 years ago that we were over the moon that she won a round from Valentina Shevchenko. And we've made a point, or I've made a point on this program, on this platform and others, of making sure we all sort of acknowledge that like losing to Caitlin Chikagian isn't one of those things that you walk around hanging your head about. Her other loss that she comes into off this, her most recent one, is Manon Fiorot, who just beat Caitlin Chikagian. So like the only people that have beaten this woman in the last bunch of years are the 3 best fighters in the division: Valentina Shevchenko, Manon Fiorot, and Caitlin Chikagian. And now she's the underdog against Marina Moroz, who's only fought 3 times in the last like 4 years. Yeah, she looked great last time out against Mashka Agapova, but like Agapova is so hit or miss. And I say that as somebody that is, still a card-carrying member of the fan club. And sure, they're reasonable wins before that. Sabina Mazo, Mayra Bueno Silva, those are okay wins. They're good wins. They're solid wins, but they're not beating a top 5 former title challenger Jennifer Maia wins. And so I'm really curious to see if, kind of similar to Derek Lewis, if being installed as the underdog in this fight, if having lost to the 2 top contenders, in this division, and then being the underdog in this fight, lights a fire under Jennifer Maia's ass, because it should. If she still wants to be in this mix, if she still wants to be a factor in this division that is growing and brimming with young talent, she needs to go out and win on Saturday. Because if she doesn't, it's all of a sudden you tumble down the rankings. And you go from a couple years ago being the darling that won 1 round from Valentina Shevchenko. Oh my God. Can you imagine? To being outside of the top 15 because the Miranda Mavericks of the world are coming. Because Tracy Cortez is there, and Aaron Blanchfield and Casey O'Neill and Macy Barber. And if Marina Moroz beats you, Marina Moroz is there. And so I'm really curious, right? Dan Hooker looked so good last weekend in showing everybody and proving everybody, or reminding everybody, that he is several levels better than Claudio Puelles and should still be ranked in the top 10 in the lightweight division. This profiles as Maia's opportunity to do it. And I'm curious to see if she can do it. Item number 8, the return of Miles Johns. I was going to call this Miles Johns 2.0, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. But it is his return. So he lost his last time out against John Castaneda, got suspended for 6 months because he popped for Adderall, which I guess he just didn't declare on his fighter survey thing. And now he comes back to this fight against Vince Morales on Saturday, and he's training at Glory MMA. I think yesterday, and I believe yesterday, I talked about him being at Fortis. That's where he was for the majority of his career. I believe his younger brother, Elijah, is still there. But he's shifted up and he's gone to Glory MMA for this camp to work with James Krause and that crew. And look, I'm somebody that was in on Miles Johns, and so I'm not all the way out on Miles Johns yet. He's lost 2 fights in the UFC, one of them to Mario Batista, who I think highly of, and then the other to John Castaneda, who, you know, I'm not sold on John Castaneda yet. I don't really have a real position on John Castaneda yet because I think it's been 3 fights or 4 fights, and I don't have a good sense. But like Miles Johns has always been one of those guys that I thought could make a move in this division. I talked about him earlier this year as a fighter to watch going into that fight with Castaneda. He was somebody at the start of my year, and even last year when I was profiling this division, talking about the layers of talent and the wave of there's young guys in the top 15, and then there's a whole nother set ready to work their way forward. Miles Johns was part of that group for me. And while he has to take a step back off that loss, I'm really interested to see if he can take a big step forward here again and get a good win over Vince Morales and have a good showing in his first camp with Krause and that group in a room where he's going to get good looks. He's going to get good training with some of the people that are there, some of the guys at flyweight, some of the guys in, some of the heavier divisions there as well. I still like the talent. I still, you come through that LFA gauntlet. It's a good circuit to cut your teeth on. He got some good wins in that organization. He's gotten a couple good performances in the UFC, back-to-back knockouts over Kevin Natividad and Anderson Dos Santos that showed us the power that he's got when he lets go of his hands. And so I still think he has that upside, but I want to see what the loss and the change of training camps and all of those things have done for his skills, both pro and con, as he steps in there this weekend. Item 9, the return of Brady Hiestand. As I talked about yesterday, he's a guy that I've been a fan of since his time on The Ultimate Fighter season 29, where he lost in the finals, to Ricky Tercios in a competitive, entertaining fight where he just couldn't quite get it done. There are elements of his game that I really like. There are pieces of what he does and what he brings to the table that I think are things you can't teach, like grit and heart and toughness that he exhibited in a couple of those fights in the house, primarily the finale and his first win against Josh Reddinghouse, fellow Spokane guy that he knew well. That's a tough assignment, especially for a kid, 23 years old, 22 at the time, maybe even 21 at the time. And so I just want to see what, after a year away, a little over a year away, getting that first one out of the way, getting a chance to sort of build and learn and continue to develop what he looks like here. He faces Fernie Garcia, who I mentioned earlier, as a Fortis MMA guy, who's coming off a loss, who lost to Journey Newsom in his debut. It feels like a winnable fight. It feels like a good matchup for Hiestand, but it's also a important fight. It's also an early important fight for this 23-year-old. As I said earlier, for Charles Johnson, you don't want to go 0-2 to start your UFC career. It's such a tough hole to climb out of. It's such a difficult spot to rebound from. It can shatter your confidence and it can set you back a ways, right? Because if you can't beat the guy that's also coming off a loss, then is there anybody in the UFC you can beat? And you're going to be asking yourself that question going into the next one when you're 0-2. And so I want to see what it looks like. I want to see if we get a little more offensive wrestling, if we get a little more kind of understanding and knowing how he wants to fight, who he wants to be in the cage, and sort of dictating those terms. This is a winnable fight. It's a good opportunity. I'm looking forward to seeing Brady back out there. Last one, item 10. Just an outstanding opener. Natalia Silva versus Teresa Bleda. I mean, this to me, and I said it yesterday, it should be on the main card. This is the kind of fight between two young talents in a very good division. that should just be getting showcased. Like it shouldn't be the fight that kicks off this card, because that means it's the one that most people are likely to miss, because this fight card starts at a time that people aren't used to expecting fight cards to start. And I just wish it was getting a greater opportunity to shine and for people to see it. And so I hope those of you listening and watching recognize that, or understand that this is a terrific fight between two very good flyweight prospects that you should check out. Natalia Silva looked very good in her debut against Jasmine Jasudavicius earlier this year. It was her first fight in 2.5 years, and there was no sign of that when she was in there. You could, like, if you had told me and I didn't know at the time that, oh, by the way, this 25-year-old Brazilian hasn't fought in 2.5 years, I'd have said you were lying. She looked that sharp. She looked that dialed in and on point in beating the Canadian. Teresa Bleda deserved a contract when she won on when she won on Contender Series earlier this year. She scored 30 26s across the board. She dominated the fight. She's 20 years old. She's undefeated. She's got a win over Lucia Pudilova, who is a former and current UFC fighter who earned a victory in the UFC a couple of weeks before Bleda fought on Contender Series. And she didn't get a contract. And some other people that won decisions less dominantly or by split decision got contracts. But here you go. She's here nonetheless. And that's the important part. This is a really good fight. I talked earlier with Jennifer Maia that there are young fighters brimming in this division, that this division is just bustling with talent. These two are part of that. They're a little further behind the Aaron Blanchfields and Mavericks and Barbers and O'Neills in that group. Absolutely. I'm not putting them in that same class. But they're there. They're coming. Natalia Silva can maybe join that group if she goes out and looks terrific again on Saturday. And if Bleda goes out and dominates physically to pick up her first UFC victory and move to 7-0 as a pro or 8-0 as a pro, then yeah, she's starting to get a look. And she's coming. This is just one of those fights that, like, if you care about the future, if you care about prospects, if you want to watch young athletes in the early days of their UFC career so that you get a sense of them and you can see them progress, pay attention to this fight. This feels like one of those fights, and I said it in my fighter to watch this week, which is about Teresa Bleda. If these two fight again in 3 years and they've got numbers next to their name, I won't be surprised. They're that talented. I've been that impressed with what I've seen from them thus far to put that out there. They're that good. This shouldn't be the opener. This should be further up the card. It's a really good fight. I can't wait to see it. This is the opener, and Chase Sherman and Waldo Cortez Acosta are on the main card. Make it make sense to me. I just don't get it. I hope everybody pays attention. I hope everybody tunes in. Catch this fight. It is a terrific fight. And it is the last fight I will talk about this week. As always, I appreciate you watching. I will be back tomorrow with the Severe Picks and Plays. I will drop a piece on the website itself following Saturday's card, talking about some of the ramifications of the wins and losses and what happens and storylines and things like that. Harry and I will be back next Tuesday with the takeaways. Shawnee and Graham will be around with the big show on Sunday, the main podcast. Lots going on the Patreon, lots going on this page. Please check everything out. Like, subscribe, review, leave comments. We're trying to do the best we can. I say it all the time. We're trying to get you guys as much content and as much quality content that you want, that you enjoy as possible. So please let me know what you think of this show and all the other stuff I put out. I really do read the comments. I pay attention. I take this stuff to heart. So good, bad, or otherwise, I want to hear from you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. I hope everything goes smoothly for you. I hope you settle in and enjoy the fights on Saturday. Look forward to watching them with you, enjoying them with you, and talking about them next week on the takeaways. Until then, we'll talk to you next week.